I hope what I'm going to show you will lighten up a little bit the atmosphere. And I'll try to run through it quickly because I think I have probably too much material. I will start with, so this is a classic image of the Ashwayet, and again the informal housing and so on in Cairo, except it's before the revolution. And what I'm going to do is to try and look a little bit at before and after, and a couple of the subjects that we talked about already today. So in 2008, I was invited as an Egyptian artist to show in the Cairo International Biennale of Contemporary Art. It was quite funny because I was, for the first time, invited in such an official event. And after having worked 20 years in Cairo as an artist, in itself, it was an achievement that a woman of, Egyptian but of Lebanese origin and Christian, not even Copt, but from smaller minorities of Christians in Egypt, was invited in an official space such as the Biennale. So of course I couldn't refuse, and from that on I decided to respond to the offer by actually doing a work in situ, which in my jargon means that I had to take into consideration the actual space I was going to work in, which was the Opera House grounds. And as you know, it's an official space. It's a military base, and it's probably one of the most expensive piece of real estate in Cairo. So what I did was, since the subject of the Biennale was the others, I decided to bring the others, which were not being noticed and taken care of, and the subject that was not being addressed of the Ashwayet, to the government and to put it in their face. And so this was a few photos that I did to sort of document the architectural patterns of the Ashwayet. So I'll run through them quickly. And we've seen a lot already, but again, this is before the revolution. If I'm going too fast, tell me, but I have just too much material, I think. So this is building the tower, and what you see in the background was because Madame Mubarak was coming to inaugurate the film festival, and so they freaked out on me and called me at 9 p.m. and said, you have to hide your shit and your ugly tower, and she's going to freak out, I don't know what. So the workers I was working with brought this beautiful material and made a tent around it. This is the tower finished, Burj Al Amal, the Tower of Hope, and a couple of images from inside, the view on the Cairo Tower. This is another side. And this was inside the tower, and inside the tower there was a sound system, and I was playing a donkey symphony, which I did specially for the piece, when I worked with a very wonderful composer, and it was like a classical piece, but one of the instruments were donkeys. So of course it created a huge controversial negotiation throughout the whole project. And at the time it was like really, it was very interesting because a lot of artists called me and told me, thank you for doing this, because you're showing us that you can, we can actually say things, and we can actually push the boundaries of what we can say, and so on. So this is a view of the tower in the Opera House grounds at night. And this is a view of the tower from the Cairo Tower. And so for the little story and my own little personal relationship to being invited as an Egyptian artist, although I am what I told you I am, I destroyed the tower a couple of course, 2 months after the Biennale was over. But on the last day of the Biennale, the security guards from the Opera House came, and I wasn't there, I was traveling, so I was coming 2 days later. They vandalized my Ashwaya tower and destroyed all my sound system, cut off all the wires, and basically did what they do in the Ashwaya. So in a way, they completed my project. But what I also did while I was building was that I used their water and I used their electricity, exactly like people do in the Ashwaya. They just illegally take what is available. And so it was hilarious because the tower was actually flooded most of the time, and it was quite disastrous. So all of this became quite an event, because in the period of 2 months, it became a cafe, an Lara Baladi, and so people sat in the cafe. It became a meeting conference room for the director of the Biennale, who invited people to have meetings in it, and in the morning I found huge ashtrays full of dead cigarette butts. It became a place for security people to take a nap. So sometimes I would come and find like blankets and onions, peels, and all kinds of things that had happened in the tower. So it was quite magical in terms of the reactions that it created. And also, of course, working with the workers who themselves live in these areas and really felt that this was a monument erected to them. And to finish it, I destroyed it because it was an ephemeral construction, but I made a little naughty thing, and I left the foundations under the ground, and I left. And so in a way, I sort of re-established my roots and confirmed my roots as an Egyptian and as, you know, belonging to this country. And funnily, when the revolution started, I think one of the things that really was difficult for me at the very beginning was that this notion of identity sort of backlashed at me again. And I talk about identity because we're in a panel about segregation, security, and borders. And I think identity is very much what we've been talking about until now, and very much at the core of segregation. And the interesting thing was that I was insulted by one of my friends at the very beginning of the revolution, and basically told that I'm Lebanese, you're Lebanese, you have to get the hell out of here. You have nothing to do here. So it was a very difficult time, but it was also, of course, a very interesting time, and maybe today I can thank him for inspiring me for what I've, you know, thought about since. And of course, after Mubarak was toppled, there was this whole wave of Egyptian flags and the proudness of, you know, the pride of being Egyptian and so on. And so Ana Masri, you know, was like the slogan in Tahrir. And so besides the fact that this increased patriotism and sudden patriotism was quite dangerous and clearly was going to head towards xenophobia and a sort of neo-nationalism, there was a very, very moving and very important, I think, thing that was happening socially, was that most people, and I think for most of us we can say that, most of us had to reposition themselves socially. Most of us changed their social landscapes, changed their friends. Most of us can say today that they have friends from Tahrir. Most of us can say that we have friends that we don't have anymore. And most of us maybe on a bigger scale, like someone like Bassem Youssef, has radically changed his life and engaged in the political discourse in a very new way. So this was very important because it's sort of, I'm a little bit lost, but I'll find myself. So in a way, Tahrir didn't leave anyone indifferent. And although today we live in a very divided society, which we never knew before in the last 60 years in that way, and I know it's a horrible time, but I think it's also a very healthy step. And if you want to look at it positively, I think it's almost a very necessary step to, you know, for people to affirm who they are and to sort of reintegrate something before they can actually move towards, and however long this will take, so it can take another 100 years, 2 years, I don't know, before we move towards a more tolerant and more united society again. Because at the end of the day, this really was the vision that people had in Tahrir, and this really was the idea, and why it was called an utopian space was because I think people felt that, you know, they were living in a parenthesis of the real world, but in a world that actually worked and well functioned for everyone. And so however long it will take to re-tap into this knowing, which we have all integrated somewhere, there was this really extraordinary issue of you know, opening up from identity, from a new identity, but also, of course, all these questions of democracy and freedom, and, you know, all these questions that unfolded, you know, non-stop and at a very high speed. And so because of this intensity, and because, like a lot of us, I think we all engaged in one way or another, and because I'm a visual person and I work with visual material, when I saw the Tiananmen Cairo video on YouTube on the 26th of January, I also saw Jean-Paul Sartre, a video of Jean-Paul Sartre posted on Facebook, talking to people in the 60s, to workers and on strike in a car factory in France. And it was incredible because he could have well be standing in Tahrir with us. And so these two videos making connections between Tahrir and between historical events and different times and different places immediately sort of inspired me or motivated me or pulled me towards continuing this sort of looking at what was happening on the ground while looking backwards, in the hope that the future can stay where it is, but hopefully we will have this repeated Tahrir at one point or another. And so the collection of images that I did started that day, and the first outcome from building this archive, which I called the Vox Populi, the voice of the people, was one on the timeline of the revolution, but also very personal selection of footage that I Googled nonstop and that I found and researched, which had to do with these questions of freedom, identity, democracy, etc., totalitarianism, and so on and so forth. And the role of photography and the role of the media, and a continuous kind of a series of interrogation marks. And so the first, and this is the image that you have on the screen, the first thing that came out of building this archive was when the 2011 July sit-in started, and I felt it was going to be long, the process was going to last, so I felt also that there was no images in the square and that there was far too much noise and microphones and hysteria, and I thought, okay, let's, this is an opportunity, to communicate here. So as I thought this, other people on Twitter and whatever also thought this, and so I found myself with Tamir Said, who's a filmmaker, with Khaled Abdallah, who you know from Mosirin, and with Omar Robert Hamilton, also from Mosirin, and the four of us started Tahrir Cinema. And this is one of the evenings of Tahrir Cinema where you see the audience looking at the screen and sitting on the floor in the middle of the evening and discussing all the issues that were taking place politically at the time. And of course the biggest question at the time was the relationship and the role to the army. And this was very much a moment where people were losing faith in the army, but at the same time were wanting to keep the army very close. So Tahrir Cinema as a public space could never have happened before the revolution. And likewise, Borg El Amal would not make sense today to build because of the lack of potency of the Biennale of Cairo. I don't even know if it still happens, but also because we've got public space today in a very different way, and we've acquired a relationship to public place that's changed very much so. And so this was a way of opening dialogue and having a free ongoing series of people. We chose different people to come and present things. So you had Note a Military Trial, who showed the testimonies from people being tortured by the army and so on. You had Masr al-Yom, who came, the two journalists from Masr al-Yom who came, I forgot their name, I'm sorry, who came to present their work and the documentation they had done of the beginning of the revolution until July. And they talked a lot about photography and their role as filmmakers and as documentarists in terms of the new relationship that people had in the street to cameras and the importance of understanding that relationship. So all sorts of dialogues and discussions took place in the square around that screen. And then later, a year later, and I'll stop talking, I made what I call a visual commentary, commentary that is called Alone Together in Media Res, which means in Latin, in the middle of things. And this video is a little bit what I've explained about all these questions being raised and unfolding throughout the revolution and after. And it's a 42 minutes piece, so I'm going to show you 10 minutes. If it's too long, I'm happy to cut it in the middle, but I think it's fun. It's shown in gallery spaces or in physical spaces as a 3 screens video installation, but here you can see the screens next to each other.
Explain yourself. I'm afraid I can't explain myself, sir. Because I'm not myself, you know.
I do not know.
But I can't put it any more clearly, for it isn't clear to me.
You. Who are you?
And to find out who you are, you have to inquire. You are the story of mankind. Which is really, if you really see that, it gives you tremendous vitality, energy, beauty, love. Because it's no longer a small entity struggling in the corner of the earth. You're part of this whole humanity.
Don't think this was an illusion. You saw it on TV, tens of thousands of Tahrir Square, freedom, solidarity, and in a way you could directly identify with it. I think it was a genuine, universal event, immediately understandable. And you know what is crucial? This is not the boring UNESCO universalism, this boring books, Weltkultur, and where, oh, this culture is great, that culture is great. No, as every true universality, it's a universality of struggle.
In this world there's room for everyone. The good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. We have developed speed, we have shut ourselves in. Machinery that gives abundance has left us in want. Our knowledge has made us cynical, our cleverness hard and unkind. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness and gentleness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost.
Американская фирма Transceptor Technology приступила к производству компьютеров «Персональный спутник».
How many fingers am I holding out? 4. And if the state says not 4, but 5, how many? 4. Take him.
Every case of police brutality against a Negro follows the same pattern. They attack you, bust you all upside your mouth, and then take you to court and charge you with assault. What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court, has nothing on his side other than what the white man chooses to give? My brothers and sisters, we have to put a stop to this. And it will never be stopped until we stop it ourselves.
not imagine that you will save yourself. No one who has once gone astray is ever spared. Even if we chose to let you live out your life, you would never escape from it. What happens to you here is forever. Things will happen to you here from which you could not recover if you lived 1,000 years. Never again will you be capable of ordinary human peace, of love or friendship or joy of living, of laughter or curiosity, courage or integrity. You will be hollow. We shall squeeze you.
Jamal! He's gone. Oh! Are you Mr. Cuticle? Oh.
C'est la plus vieille spécialisation sociale, la spécialisation du pouvoir, qui est à la racine du spectacle. Le spectacle est ainsi une activité spécialisée qui parle pour l'ensemble des autres. C'est la représentation diplomatique de la société hiérarchique devant elle-même, où toute autre parole est bannie. Le plus moderne y est aussi le plus archaïque.
When you live out on the frontier, you have no identity. You're the nobody. Therefore, you get very tough. You have to prove that you are somebody. And so you become very violent. And so identity is always accompanied by violence.
In Pattyhurst, you standing there in front of the Senegalese Liberation Army flag with your legs spread. I was wondering, were you getting it every night from a black revolutionary man and his women, or were you really dead? And now that you are on the run, what goes on in your mind? Your sister lays sick by the window. You know your mama doesn't sit and cry. And your daddy, well, you know what your daddy said, Patty. You know what your daddy said, Patty? He said, 60 days ago, she was such a lovely child. Now here she is, with a gun in her hand.
Everybody knows Africa has to be united now to have any headway. But how is it going to happen? It's a good question. If I can take this country, then Africa is settled. Once there's a good government in one African country, the whole of Africa will be liberated. See, we need one good government, strict and progressive, clean government that knows what it's doing. No diplomacy, no compromises, yeah, no agreement, no Marxism, Leninism, no capitalism, Africanism.
Those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress, the hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people, and so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
لو انت عندك كرامة وانت انسان وراجل في البلد دي يبقى تنزل تحميني وتحمي اي بنت ثانية. لو فضلت قاعد في البيت تبقى تستحق كل اللي بيجارك، ومش انت لوحدك. انت هتبقى مدان، انت هتبقى مسؤول، وانت اللي عليك ذنب كبير قوي، ذنب البلد دي وذنب كل واحد عايش فيها. انت هتبقى شايل مسؤولية كل واحد نازل الشارع عشان يطالب بحقه وانت قاعد في بيتك.
كله يقول عايز تغيير، كله نايم جنب الدير، كل واحد جوه بحره الامتى العيش زي السلاطين. هما ليه بيعلمونا كانوا احسن فرحونا، ما في شغل في صابونه قول لي ممكن نعمل ايه، ونلاقي شغل فيها هي وادي شقه 100 بس يا دوب ممكن تحوش وتجيب لك شقه طعميه، رغيف العيش بيأمنوه والحشيش بيدعموه والشباب ده يمشي بخطة صنف جديد على ابوه مش عايزين ناكل تاكل ولا حتى نلعب كونغ فو احنا ناس عايزين فوقنا اللي بالي بالكوا ضيعوه وادي رشوة في انتخاب هو ده عين الصواب لو فكرت تقول ده ظلم هتكون عايشة للكلاب هي دي معنى الحرية طعمها احلى بالملوخية يعني تعيش برنطقية مهما يكون عندك كلام
Did you ever think that you would see demonstrations like this?
Never. I demonstrated against King Farouk during the 50s when I was a child. We demonstrated against King Farouk, against Nasser, against Saddam, against Mubarak. I went to prison under Saddam. I lived in exile under Mubarak. But I am here. I am 80 years and we are not going to submit. This I have never seen. I have never seen in my life. So we have to sit, we have to keep our place.
I think that is one of the functions of news, to blow up a storm so big that you can dissipate it by coverage. It's a way of getting rid of the pressure by coverage. That you can actually dissipate situations by giving it maximal coverage.
Thank you. If you want to see it again, you can Google Creative Time, Lara Baladi, and you'll find it on the internet. So this is the last work. It will take me just 2 minutes. After digesting a little bit all this footage that I've watched and lived for a lot of it during the last 2 years, I went into a very different way of working, and almost in a way, in a more coming a little bit back to myself, but with the experience of Tahrir. So in terms of my strategies, I sort of navigated between different ways of working and got lost and came back. And so here you see the wall, if you remember, in Muhammad Mahmoud, which was one of the first walls that the army built. And I used this inscription to title the work and the sculpture that I built in the last couple of months, which is a chastity belt. So it's not a very Egyptian object. A chastity belt that's inspired from a 17th century French chastity belt, which I'm not sure was actually worn by women, but definitely which has potency in terms of what we've been talking about and what we've experienced in the last few months and years in Egypt. And in a way I chose, this object was very, very powerful for me because it's not Egyptian in a way, and because, again, I want to really insist on the fact that what we are experiencing here is not just local but global. That whether it's because the media are putting more light onto these gang rapes happening in India and the Pussy riots and all the events that we know have happened in the last 2 years along with Tahrir and after. But I think it has to do with a movement that is not just local, and I think in a way we need to remember that and to reposition again ourselves in terms of where we belong also amongst other countries and amongst other movements. And so this belt is, of course, an object of repression and oppression, and sexual repression and oppression, but in a weird way, and maybe in a way this is why it also looks, as I was told, sexy and like lingerie and quite refined. Maybe it also, for me, carries a sense of, this realization that I've had to protect myself in a way that I never thought about before, and not just sexually, morally, intellectually, religiously, I mean on every level of oneself. And so the object is beyond proportions. It's 2 meters 40, and so it can actually take in and absorb a human being. So the idea is that it does have a sense of, a feel of a prison to it, but as well as a space of security for oneself. So I think this sort of fine line between those two is really what we are constantly moving back and forth between these spaces, and I think these are important issues. That's it. Thank you.